the 21st of May 1951. Wonsan Harbor, a North Korean battery buried in a cave on the Kalmagak Peninsula, struck turret, one of USS New Jersey, and shrapnel killed Seaman Robert Osterwind, the ship's only combat death in Korea. The shock lasted seconds. The answer lasted minutes. 5-inch divided by 38 secondaries and the 16-inch divided by 50. Mark 7 rifles found the cave, smashed the mouth, and collapsed the position. Then, the big ship stayed on the line. You can hear the steel doors clank and feel cordite sting the air as loaders send 1-ton projectiles to the hoists. The Mark 37 directors, under Mark 12 divided by Mark 22 radar, turn a muzzle flash into math. Men in the shell decks parbuckle the next giant round with rope and rollers. A gun captain touches the firing key with a burned glove, and the deck heaves as the breech thunders shut. Above, a signalman traces the shoreline with binoculars and calls ranges in a steady voice. Below, a machinist's mate watches needles twitch and holds 212,000 shaft horsepower on a leash, so the guns never outrun the engines. Precision turned grief into resolve. Within days, New Jersey shelled targets at Yangyang and Kansong bridges dropping into green water. A rail yard burning black, an ammunition dump going up like a second sunrise. The ship's size did not slow her. She was quick with purpose, 887 feet of steel moving at will, armor thick enough to shrug off hate and speed enough to choose the fight. Every part worked because every person did. Powder room crews stacked silk bags with practiced hands. Magazine teams chocked shell cars, shouted numbers, and sent another ton of America uphill. Listen closely and you hear the American idea at work. Citizens turned. Professionals carry a fallen shipmate in their hearts and answer by doing the job perfectly. No speeches. No drama, just competence that feels like thunder. A Marine platoon on a windy ridge, radios, shot over, and the rumble answers. The fight that could take hours takes minutes. The enemy learns a hard truth. Cave rock is not armor when radar sees. Directors compute, and sailors refuse to miss. They hide again. They shoot again. They are found again. Here is the bridge to the next revelation. The black-hulled ship will not only endure ambush and strike back, she will return as the flagship of a free coalition, greet a president on her deck, and, days later, erase the next challenge with heavier, faster hands. The lesson of Wonsan is simple and American. We mourn, we master, we move forward, and our enemies cannot keep up. By October 1951, that sentence wasn't praise. It was a pattern written across Korea's east coast. Find the gun pit, crush it. Find the rail yard, cut it. Find the dam, drop it. The sea became a classroom, and New Jersey was the teacher who never raised her voice. She simply put the chalk line exactly where it had to go. Can a ship this big be that exact? Yes. The Merc 38 primary battery director and the Merc 37 secondary directors, riding beneath Merc 12 divided by Mark 22 orange peel antennas, fused with plotting boards until fog and rain were just details. Rangefinders whispered solutions. The ladder sights settled. Then 9 16-inch divided by 50 rifles spoke, and fall of shot walked straight onto the threat until the map changed shape. Marines and ROK troops felt the ground jump, moved later, fought shorter, lived longer. Accuracy became mercy. Now drop to the human deck plates. Ammunition handlers in sweat-darkened dungarees eased 1-ton shells toward the hoists beside Korean laborers hired in port. Deep in the hull, a machinist's mate watched needles jitter in hot light and kept the great turbines true, so the guns never outran the engines. In the plotting room, a fire controlman traced arcs with a grease pencil and called corrections in a voice that never shook. On the forecastle, a boatswain smelled burnt powder and grinned when the next salvo slammed like a vault door in a storm. The deck trembled. Paint chips danced. Someone laughed once, and then cinched a lanyard, because professionalism sits next to awe. On the bridge wing, a junior officer mouthed the spotter's line, every shot on target like a prayer he was learning to believe. The enemy tried to answer with caves, decoys, and night moves. It did not matter. Radar saw, spotters heard, and corrections landed. A gun flashes. Moments later, the crater replaces it. The realization spread along the coast. They were not fighting a single ship. They were fighting an American system, sensors, doctrine, training, and the will to repeat excellence until resistance collapsed. Here is the bridge to escalation. After overhaul, New Jersey will return as 7th Fleet flagship guns, plus the confidence of free nations on one deck. Within days, she will strike a nerve center with 7 direct hits, host a head of state on her planked deck, and then prove that ceremony and shock can live in the same week when your crew is ready and your values are steady. On the 5th of April 1953, New Jersey relieved Missouri as 7th Fleet flagship. The brass BB-62, shining on her bow like a promise. Within a week, she punched 7 direct hits into a North Korean communications center, the kind of blow that severs nerves as well as wires. On May 23, President Syngman Rhee and Lieutenant General Maxwell Taylor came aboard in Pusan. Sailors in dress whites lined the rail while flag plot murmured with radios and grease pencils. The quarterdeck smelled of holystoned teak and fresh paint as the band struck a march and cameras clicked. Rhee shook hands with tanned gunners who would be at their stations before the ink on the guest log dried. How fast can a democracy pivot from salute to shock? Faster than an ambush can form. This is training, logistics, and purpose. In Combat Information Center, a young radio man logged bursts while a staff officer drew range rings and whispered corrections to the directors. On deck, a turret chief barked, "Stand clear." The breech slid home, and the gun captain's thumb kissed the firing key. Secondary mounts hammered in tight cadence, screaming arcs into the cliffs. The ship held a steady course at speed, turning slowly into the wind to keep smoke clear of the directors. The bow shouldered grey water aside. The wake boiled white. The ship did not flinch. Add the human heartbeat. A Korean liaison officer translated ground requests. The answers rolled in steel seconds later, and a platoon leader ashore swore he felt the wind change when the big rifles spoke. Down in the mess, a steward steadied coffee for a flag lieutenant on his 20th hour of watch and said, "Sir, it'll be quiet soon," knowing the opposite was likely true. On the main deck, a boatswain's mate put a hand on the capstan and felt the vibration of an entire nation at work. The enemy felt the weight. Caves did not save them. Timing did not surprise us. Fire only triggered a larger reply, and the realization crept into their dugouts that they were facing a system, not a silhouette. Sensors found. Doctrine decided. Americans executed. They did not waste the lesson of those 7 hits. Signalmen logged each correction. Gun crews shaved seconds off their drills. Engineers tweaked pumps to keep pressure rock solid. Here is the bridge to endurance at a scale that seems impossible. July will bring 2 straight days of thunder, 16 hours in all, a coastline forced to listen to American staying power. July 11-12, 1953, 2 dates that still feel like hot metal. The air tasted like brass and cordite. The sea quivered at every broadside. Breaches slammed, hoists cycled, and crewmen taped raw fingers and went back to the line. Gunfire support is more than noise. It is a chain that starts with a whisper and ends with terrain changed so completely that maps need fresh pencil lines. Radar finds. Spotters confirm. Directors compute. Gun captains make steel speak. Engine rooms hold the pulse near 33 knots, so the directors keep a clean view and the fall of shot data stays pure. Magazines feed the line like well-oiled lungs. Shell cars roll, powder cases stack, and the tempo never sags. Stand in a turret for a moment, you feel the breech block's oily mass. You smell burnt graphite and hot metal. A gun captain's voice is calm, almost bored, because stress dissolves when skill takes over. The rammer hisses, the breech locks. The key clicks. The deck jumps, and your ribs count the shock. Down 2 decks, a powder man wipes his face with a taped hand and whispers, "Again." In the throttle flats, a sailor named John M. Hernandez holds the RPM steady while machinists' mates James Cronin and Robert E. Plank watch for the slightest shudder. Now look outward. Smoke boils over ridgelines. A supply dump goes from solid to sparks. A bridge drops cleanly into a river like a felled tree. A cave mouth that took weeks to blast and shore up becomes a raw scar in the rock. The enemy learns that camouflage takes days. Losing it takes minutes. They move at night, believing darkness is cover. Radar and doctrine say otherwise. They fan guns along the coast, believing dispersal is safety. The ship simply moves and erases them in order. Marines on the hills hear the thunder and share a tired smile. A forward observer notes that it is possible to set a watch by the cadence of the salvos. A South Korean soldier folds a leaflet into his pocket and says, "We are not alone." Endurance plus accuracy breaks more than bunkers. It breaks will. It says, "We are here as long as it takes and fresh tomorrow." On July 26, near Wonsan, New Jersey, fights her last Korean engagement. The guns fall silent, but the lesson keeps ringing along the waterline. Nothing the enemy builds can outlast what America brings hour after hour when citizens turn, professionals and a free nation chooses to finish the job. The nickname fit dark hull, fast stride, hard bite. In May 1951, a cave gun killed Seaman Robert Osterwind. 2 months later, enemy gunners tried again and managed only near misses before New Jersey's counterfire broke them in minutes. By summer's end, the battleship had smashed dams, bridges, gun emplacements, marshalling yards, and ammunition dumps with a calm that stunned observers. On June 6, photographs show the center and left 16-inch rifles of Turret 2 spitting orange flame while powder smoke rolled low along the teak. On August 3, sailors and Korean laborers eased a grey-painted projectile toward the hoist beneath the orange peel radar domes as the square-shouldered Merc 38 Director loomed above like a lighthouse. Freeze that image and unpack the machine. The Merc 38 rides herd on the main battery. The Mark 37 keeps the 5-inch divided by 38 seconds honest shot after shot. Mark 12 and Mark 22, radar turn fog and smoke into numbers a sailor can trust. In the shell decks below, sailors parbuckle 1-ton projectiles with rope, rollers, and practiced legs until muscle memory looks like magic. A turret captain checks primer trays with a finger scarred from drill upon drill. In April 1953, the logbooks record names: Seaman Arthur G. Longley and GM1 Henry P. Castles feeding Turret 2, fireman John M. Hernandez on the throttles, machinists' mates James Cronin and Robert E. Plank holding watch. Ordinary Americans, precise as instruments, Now add the human moment in motion. A South Korean liaison on the bridge relays a ground unit's urgent call. A fire controlman says, "On," and the ladder sight swings. Seconds later, the fall of shot walks a ridgeline and the radio goes quiet. Somewhere, a Marine lieutenant exhales a thanks he will only admit years later. In engine room number 3, Hernandez holds RPM like a heartbeat, while sweat runs off his elbows. In the magazines, Longley chalks numbers on the bulkhead and shouts them up the voice tube, castles, palms a primer like a coin, and grins at the superstition of doing it the same way every time. The enemy's shock is bitter and honest. Shields when radar sees. Darkness is not cover when directors do not sleep. Surprise is not a weapon when discipline is faster. They realized they were not fighting distance or weather or luck. They were fighting American practice muscle memory, built from freedom's abundance and a promise to allies that the line would hold. This ship did not appear by magic. She was decommissioned, preserved, woke fast, trained hard, crossed half the world at speed, and arrived in time to change the shape of a war. The bridge to the finale is clear. After ceremony and shock come statistics that feel impossible hours of continuous fire, last salvos on the eve of an armistice, and a coalition's salute that turns steel into symbol. New Jersey decommissioned on the 30th of June 1948. She was de-mothballed at Bayonne by September 1950. She recommissioned on the 21st of November 1950 as Fleet Admiral William F. Bull Halsey spoke about duty and speed. She trained in the Caribbean, left Norfolk on the 16th of April 1951, arrived off Korea on May 17, and began shelling near Wonsan on May 20, as Vice Admiral Harold Martin broke his flag aboard. That is a peacetime to combat pivot measured in months, not years, and it reads like a challenge accepted. Read the stats out loud because they sound like fiction. 887 feet of armor and power, 212,000 shaft horsepower, 9 16-inch divided by 50. Mark 7 rifles, hurling 1-ton shells more than 20 miles in any weather. A conning tower armoured in inches that read like an anvil. 33-knot speed that made a fortress fast. Crew strength in the thousands, drawn from farms, shops, classrooms, and back alleys, welded into a team by training and trust. You could feel the United States in the details. Spare parts that actually arrived, fuel that was always there, and a supply chain that treated the Pacific as a long hallway, not a barrier. The human line is the secret. Reservists left machine shops and classrooms to become turret captains and throttlemen. Shipfitters peeled preservation tape from muzzles and later watched those same guns speak in newsreels. Young officers learned the sea at flank because there was no time to do it slow. Cooks kept coffee hot on a rolling deck, while staff officers planned the next strike under red lights. A chief told a kid sailor, "Your hands will learn before your head does trust the drill," and the kid believed him on the third watch when muscle memory saved seconds. The enemy expected delay and got arrival. They thought a democracy would argue itself to a standstill and met discipline guided by purpose. They learned that abundance, organized and aimed, is a weapon all its own. Flagship status twice. 7 direct hits on a communications center within days of relief. Shore batteries annihilated on contact. A 2-day, 16-hour finale that bent a coastline to obedience. A last salvo near Wonsan on July 26. The lesson echoes still. You do not out-endure the United States, and when America decides, the decision holds like steel. Because citizens who love freedom make machines that keep promises. After the thunder came the salute. On the 16th of September 1953, President Rhee presented the Presidential Unit Citation to the 7th Fleet. Men with taped fingers and oil-stained cuffs stood at attention and felt quiet pride run through the ranks. It was not triumph for its own sake. It was recognition of a promise kept under fire. Steel had spoken, but character had carried it to Korea and back. Every shot on target, most beautiful shooting I have seen in 5 years, a forward spotter wrote. And men on the ridge lines learned to breathe again when the big rifles spoke. Precision meant a shorter fight, fewer ambushes, fewer letters home with hard news. New Jersey turned numbers into mercy. The Mark 38 director and the Mark 37 secondaries, tied to Mark 12 and Mark 22 radar, erased fog, rain, and darkness as excuses. Range was just distance. Time was just a drill. A gun flashed on a cliff, and the solution clicked across voice tubes like a hymn people knew by heart. Down in the shell decks, sailors parbuckled 1-ton projectiles, with ropes and rollers so smooth the motion looked choreographed. In CIC, a radioman traced arcs with a grease pencil, while a lieutenant counted seconds to splash and adjusted with a calm that sounded like certainty. Marines on the hills started saying, "The door is about to slam," because that is exactly how the salvos felt in their ribs. The enemy tried the old tricks: caves, decoys, night shoots. Radar saw through night. Directors ignored bravado. Spotters wrote the map in real time. A South Korean liaison aboard passed fire requests in a clipped voice. Answers came back in steel. Shot, over. Splash. Silence. Then a small cheer. Then the patrol pushed forward because terror had been replaced by timing. The ship did not waste anything. Powder charges were logged like money. Bearings were spoken like prayers. Standards were kept so tight that excellence turned ordinary. Competence stacked on competence, until resistance felt foolish. You could stand on the quarterdeck and hear the whole American machine breathe. Turbines below, radios within, guns ahead, and a nation's will stretching from Bayonne to Wonsan through the hands of citizens turned professionals. The enemy learned a painful lesson. You cannot win a duel when the other side can find you in the rain and put steel inside a cave mouth on the second salvo. You cannot win a contest of will when the other side can do the same thing tomorrow, and the day after, and the week after. The bridge to what comes next is the coalition. Standing on that same quarterdeck, an Allied president on teak planks, an American admiral at his side, and a crew that will turn salute into shock action the very next time shore guns roar. The 23rd of May 1953 in Pusan felt like a holiday at sea. President Syngman Rhee and Lieutenant General Maxwell Taylor came aboard New Jersey, and the quarterdeck smelled of holy-stoned teak, coffee, and salt. Sailors in dress whites lined the rail. Cameras clicked. A band found the tempo. In flag plot, the grease pencils never stopped moving. The ship was a stage and a headquarters at once. 4 days later, when shore batteries fired, the answer was not a speech. It was steel. 5-inch mounts snapped into cadence. 16-inch rifles bellowed, and the phrase "annihilated enemy positions" went from dispatch language to a thing you could see in the cliff face. Democracy had pivoted from ceremony to shock inside a week. That is not luck. That is discipline guided by purpose. A steward who handed a cup to a flag lieutenant on the day of the visit refilled it again the day the guns spoke. The cup rattled with each salvo, and no one spilled. On deck, a turret chief barked, "Stand clear," and the breach locked home like a vault. Below, a machinist's mate held RPM rock steady so directors kept a clean view through the smoke. A Korean liaison officer repeated a ground call and listened to the silence that follows good news. Shot, over. Splash. Target neutralized. A POW later wrote that when the mountain itself trembled, men in the trenches stopped arguing and started praying, because prayer felt useful and arguing did not. The enemy realized they were not facing a silhouette. They were facing a system. Sensors found. Doctrine decided. Americans executed. The chain worked the same way in rain or shine, in salute or firefight. This is what Allies saw on that deck, and what enemies learned in those caves. A free nation that can shift from welcome to war without losing its soul. The ship hosted a head of state without preening, then kept faith with soldiers in the mud without pausing. Ceremony and competence lived in the same hull. The bridge to the next turn is endurance at a scale that sounds like myth. 2 straight days of thunder, 16 total hours, and a coastline forced to listen to American staying power like it was a weather event. Look at the parts. Mark 12 and Mark 22 radar on those orange peel domes. Merc 37 directors handling the 5-inch divided by 38 seconds. The square-shouldered Mark 38 riding herd on the main battery, plotting boards and range clocks, shell cars, primer trays, powder hoists, voice tubes, sound-powered phones. Everything labelled, maintained, drilled, logged. Nothing glamorous on its own. Together, unstoppable. Logistics painted the backdrop, fuel where it needed to be, parts that arrived before anyone begged, ammunition pallets stacked high, because factories back home treated the Pacific like a long hallway, not a wall, crew strength in the thousands. Each watch overlapping, so the ship never had to learn tired lessons twice. A reservist, who left a machine shop in Ohio, now ran a turret, like a production line under fire. A kid from Camden held a primer like a coin and grinned at the habit of doing it the same way every time. A chief told a new sailor, "Your hands will learn before your head does." And he was right by the third watch. Precision turned into culture, and culture turned into pace. The enemy did not meet a gun. They met a schedule. They aimed at a hull. They hit an idea. "We heard the ship again," one captured soldier admitted, "and the ground moved before we made up our minds." The lesson is hard and human. People who practice win. People who share a standard move faster than fear. And people who know why they are there can turn a steel city into a quiet promise kept over water. New Jersey did not wander the coast searching for luck. She arrived with timing, teamwork, and truth. Find, fix, finish, then move. The bridge to the payoff is the statistics that feel like fiction until you say them out loud. 1-ton shells thrown more than 20 miles, 33 knot speed on an 887-foot fortress, armor measured in inches that read like an anvil, and a 2-day, 16-hour bombardment that bent a coastline's will. New Jersey measured 887 feet from bow to stern, and still made roughly 33 knots fast enough to reposition along a broken coast before the enemy's phone calls finished connecting. Her turbines delivered 212 Theero shaft horsepower. Her 9 16-inch divided by 50 Mark 7 rifles could hurl a 1-ton shell more than 20 miles, and weather did not matter when radar fed the directors. Armor was a language in inches, thick belts and turret faces measured in numbers that sounded like the side of a bank vault, with a conning tower that turned danger into noise. These are not bragging rights, they are a checklist of why ambushes failed. A cave mouth is a hard target until 1,000 pounds of steel arrives on time. A battery looks clever until fire control makes the flash a reference point, and the second salvo ends the lesson. Watch the rhythm inside. Ram, lock, fire, extract, repeat. Hoists hum. Shell cars clack. Voice tubes sing the same syllables in the same order, because that is how you go fast without hurry. Keep it steady. A throttleman tells the ship and himself. On. A director officer says when the numbers line up. Clear. A turret captain snaps before the key turns. The human body becomes a metronome, and the machine keeps time. Holy cow! A Marine corporal breathed the first time he saw a bridge vanish like a toy to a curtain of splash and smoke. That is not a ship, that is a day of the week. The enemy learned that statistic plus skill equals certainty. 33 knots meant no safe flank. 1-ton shells meant no safe bunker. Radar meant no safe night. Drill meant no safe pause. The bridge forward is the ledger of outcomes that seems impossible until you stack them. 1 KIA aboard despite repeated exposure to shore fire. Immediate 7 direct hits on a communications center, shore batteries erased on contact, and the last engagement logged near Wonsan before the guns fell silent and the Allies saluted. Start with the quiet miracle. 1 combat death aboard through months of counter-battery duels and close work on a hostile coast. That number lands like a prayer answered. Because a cave gun did hit once, and grief walked the decks, and still the crew worked the problem without breaking. Add the pace that bordered on myth. 2 days of thunder in July 1953, 9 hours on Saturday, 7 on Sunday, while engine rooms held the pulse and magazines fed the line. Add the precision that saved lives ashore, a spotter calling every shot on target, and Marines who learned to trust a sound they could feel in their ribs. Then, say the names because America is people, not steel. Arthur G. Longley and Henry P. Castles feeding turret 2, John M. Hernandez holding RPM steady in engine room number 3. James Cronin and Robert E. Plank standing the watch like human governors. These are not slogans, they are craftsmen under fire. A South Korean liaison on the bridge relayed ground calls with the urgency of family. A steward poured coffee for a flag officer at hour 20 and called it hot morale. A boatswain's mate told a kid, "Do it right, and you won't have to do it twice." And the kid discovered that was true even when the deck jumped under his boots. POWs later wrote about mountains that moved, bridges that fell like trees, and nights when the horizon blinked white. They were not cowards. They were honest observers who felt futility setting in. The enemy realized resistance was a habit, not a plan, and habits break when they meet a practiced system. The bridge to the last chapter is the salute that followed the kind nation's reserve for friends who did hard things well and stayed until the doing was done. On the 16th of September 1953, President Syngman Rhee presented the Presidential Unit Citation to the 7th Fleet. New Jersey's sailors, men with taped fingers, oil-stained cuffs, and salt baked into their smiles, stood at attention and felt quiet. Pride moved down the ranks like a breeze. That ribbon did not make the guns louder. It made the story clearer. America had shown up fast, learned faster, and stayed as long as it took. The timeline reads like a dare answered. Decommissioned in 1948, demothballed by September 1950. Recommissioned the 21st of November 1950. Training in the Caribbean, underway from Norfolk the 16th of April 1951, on station off Korea May 17, firing by May 20, relieving Missouri as 7th Fleet flagship on the 5th of April 1953, 7 direct hits on a communications center within a week. An Allied president on deck May 23. Enemy batteries annihilated 4 days later. 2 straight days of bombardment, 9 hours and 7 hours, in July. Last engagement near Wonsan on July 26. Then the guns quieted, and the Allies saluted. Add the specs that still sound like tall tales. 887 feet, roughly 33 knots, 212,000 shaft horsepower, and 9 16-inch rifles hurling 1-ton shells past 20 miles. Armor measured in inches that turned danger into noise. Add the human cadence that made numbers matter. Shot. Over. Splash. Target neutralized. Add the enemy voices that admitted mountains moved and arguments died when the big ship spoke. Now say the simple thing Americans can be proud of. We built a machine no tyranny could match, and we manned it with citizens who learned excellence on purpose. We treated allies like family and enemies like problems to be solved fast and fair. We turned abundance into reliability, reliability into speed, and speed into mercy for men under fire. That is why no other nation could have done this the same way, at the same pace, with the same heart. The last image is quiet. A black hull slides through evening water. The wake is white. The flag lifts in a steady wind. The promise holds.